In the winter of 1939, the Soviet Union launched an invasion of Finland with absolute confidence. From Moscow, the outcome looked inevitable. 1 million Red Army soldiers crossed the border, supported by thousands of tanks, artillery pieces, and aircraft. Finland, by comparison, appeared hopelessly outmatched, with barely 300,000 troops, almost no armor, and limited air support. Soviet planners believed the campaign would be over in weeks, a short march followed by surrender. But war is not fought on maps. It is fought on the ground. Finland was not open land. It was a country of forests, frozen rivers, and narrow paths buried beneath meters of snow. In December, daylight lasted only a few hours. Temperatures dropped far below zero, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes and seize weapons if they were not constantly maintained. Soviet soldiers arrived in dark uniforms meant for open terrain, standing out sharply against the white landscape. Finnish troops, dressed head to toe in white camouflage, blended seamlessly into the environment they had known their entire lives. As the Red Army advanced deeper into the forests, its numerical advantage began to lose meaning. Tanks could not maneuver between trees. Long columns were forced onto narrow roads where they stretched for kilometers, vulnerable and slow. Command and control broke down as inexperienced officers struggled to adapt, many of the Soviet Union's best leaders having been executed during Stalin's purges only years earlier. It was in this environment that small, disciplined Finnish units began to fight differently. They did not meet the enemy head-on. They isolated columns, cut supply lines, and used silence, patience, and terrain as weapons. The forest became a battlefield that punished noise and rewarded stillness. Somewhere along the Karelian front, in this frozen maze of trees and snow, a single Finnish soldier took his position. He carried no special equipment. His rifle had no scope, no modern enhancements, and no features the Red Army considered dangerous. To Soviet commanders, such a weapon was outdated, nearly irrelevant in modern warfare. They had no idea that this assumption was about to cost them hundreds of lives. Simo Heiha did not look like the kind of man armies fear. He was short, quiet, and unknown outside his village. Before the war, he was a farmer and a hunter, living a life defined by seasons rather than politics. He had never studied military theory, never trained as an elite soldier, and never imagined himself as a legend. What he did have was something far older than doctrine or technology, an intimate understanding of the forest. From childhood, Simo hunted small game in the dense Finnish woods, not large animals that allowed room for error, but shy birds that vanished at the slightest sound or movement. To hunt them successfully, he learned to sit motionless for hours, to control his breathing, and to judge distance without instruments. He learned how snow absorbed sound, how shadows shifted during the day, and how prey reacted when it sensed danger but could not see it. These skills were not taught in any military school, yet they were precisely what the frozen battlefield demanded. When Simo was issued a rifle, he did not choose a new one. He brought his own, a familiar bolt-action weapon he had used for years. Other soldiers fitted scopes to their rifles, believing modern optics were essential. Simo refused. To him, a scope was a liability. Glass reflected light. In bright snow, even a brief glint could be seen hundreds of meters away. In extreme cold, lenses fogged from internal condensation, turning precision into blindness. And most dangerously, a scope forced the shooter to raise his head higher, exposing movement where none should exist. Iron sights kept him low. They kept him invisible. While Soviet doctrine emphasized mass, firepower, and forward momentum, Simo's war was built on stillness. He selected positions before dawn, studying the terrain until every tree, dip, and rise became familiar. He prepared the snow around him carefully, compressing it until it was hard, sometimes freezing it solid so the blast of his rifle would not throw up a cloud of powder. He wrapped himself and his weapon in white, reducing his outline until it dissolved into the landscape. Once in position, he did not move. Hours passed. Cold seeped into bone and muscle. Snow pressed against his face. The forest remained silent. Soviet soldiers advanced cautiously, unaware they were already being watched. Simo waited for moments of exposure. An officer stopping to read a map, a machine gun crew setting up, a soldier pausing carelessly in the open. When he fired, it was a single controlled shot, then nothing. No follow-up fire, no movement, just silence. The Red Army heard rifles cracking in the distance, but they could not locate the source. There was no visible muzzle blast, no shifting snow, no breath hanging in the air. They fired back at shadows and empty trees, wasting ammunition and revealing their own positions. Each attempt to hunt the sniper ended the same way. Another man fell, and the forest swallowed the sound. Day after day, the pattern repeated. Soviet patrols advanced into white silence and returned smaller, shaken, or not at all. Reports reached command describing an enemy they could not see and could not predict. It made no sense. No sniper could operate this long, this accurately, without being detected. But Simo was not fighting like a soldier. He was hunting the way he always had, patiently, methodically, and without emotion. The Red Army still believed they were facing a man with a rifle. They did not yet understand that they were facing someone who had turned the land itself into a weapon. As the days turned into weeks, the Soviet command began to realize that this was no ordinary threat. Losses continued to rise in a sector where no major battles were being fought, no artillery duels recorded, and no breakthroughs attempted. Men were simply disappearing. Officers were found dead beside maps. Machine gun crews were eliminated before firing a single round. Entire patrols reported being pinned down by a sniper they could neither see nor silence. The response was escalation. Soviet counter-snipers were deployed, many of them trained in modern marksmanship schools and equipped with the best optical sights available. Their orders were clear: locate the Finnish sniper, follow the glint, track the muzzle flash, and eliminate him. They took positions in trees, on ridgelines, and along likely firing lanes. They scanned endlessly through scopes, waiting for the smallest sign of movement. They never found it. Instead, the counter-snipers became targets themselves. One by one, they were killed by shots that came from directions they had already cleared. Sometimes two would fall within minutes, struck from different angles, creating the impression that multiple shooters were operating in coordination. In reality, it was the same man, moving after each engagement, using terrain knowledge to reposition without leaving tracks that could be followed. The forest worked in his favor. Sound behaved unpredictably among trees and snowbanks, echoing and bending until distance and direction became impossible to judge. Visibility was measured not in hundreds of meters, but in moments, a brief opening between trunks, a flash of gray against white. Simo understood this instinctively. He knew where soldiers would stop, where they would bunch up, and where they would feel falsely secure. Psychological strain began to spread through the Red Army units assigned to the area. Soldiers slowed their advances, scanning every tree, every shadow. Movements became hesitant. Men refused to raise their heads above snowbanks. Officers had to threaten punishment to force patrols forward. The idea of an unseen sniper waiting patiently in silence began to dominate their thoughts more than the cold or hunger. Rumors circulated among the ranks. Some claimed the Finns were using dozens of hidden shooters. Others insisted the sniper was not human at all, but something that belonged to the forest itself. The nickname spread quickly. The White Death. It was spoken quietly, almost superstitiously, as if saying it too loudly might draw attention. Attempts to triangulate the shooter's position failed repeatedly. Artillery was brought in to blanket suspected areas, shelling stretches of forest into broken timber and churned snow. When the bombardments ended, Soviet units advanced cautiously, believing no one could survive such fire. Minutes later, shots rang out again. Another man fell. The silence returned. What made the situation unbearable was not just the casualties, but the uncertainty. There was no clear enemy line, no visible threat to engage. Soldiers could not fight back against what they could not see. Each step forward felt like an invitation to death. Morale collapsed in slow, quiet ways, shaking hands, whispered prayers, eyes darting at every sound. Simo continued his routine without deviation. He did not chase kills or fire recklessly. He waited, he observed. He chose targets that mattered, removing leaders, gunners, and scouts whose absence multiplied confusion. Each shot deepened the sense that the forest was watching, judging, and punishing every mistake. By the time Soviet commanders acknowledged the scale of the problem, it was no longer about eliminating a single sniper. The damage had already been done. Entire units were stalled, pinned psychologically by a man they had never seen, armed with a rifle they had once dismissed as obsolete. The Red Army had come to Finland expecting a short campaign, decided by numbers and machines. Instead, in the frozen silence of the forest, they were learning that fear could spread faster than any army, and that one patient hunter could break the will of thousands. By early February, Soviet High Command could no longer ignore what was happening in the forests along the Karelian front. Reports from the field had shifted in tone. What began as complaints about sniper harassment had turned into descriptions of paralysis. Units were advancing only a few hundred meters a day. Some refused to move at all. The problem was no longer tactical, it was psychological. Orders were issued to end it by any means necessary. If the sniper could not be found, the land itself would be destroyed. Artillery units were repositioned, and grid coordinates were marked across entire sections of forest. The plan was simple and brutal: saturate the area with shells until nothing living could remain. Trees would be shattered, snow churned into mud and ice, and any hidden positions erased through sheer force. Before these bombardments, Soviet units made one last attempt to flush the sniper out. Large patrols advanced deliberately, firing into likely hiding spots, cutting branches, and detonating grenades to provoke a response. The forest answered only with silence. Men grew jumpy, fingers tightened on triggers. Every sound felt amplified, every pause unbearable. Then the shots returned. Men fell in quick succession, struck with the same precision as before. The firing never lingered. It appeared from one direction, vanished, then reappeared from another. The illusion of a lone sniper was replaced by the belief that they were surrounded. Panic spread unevenly but persistently, eroding discipline. Soldiers fired wildly into the trees, wasting ammunition and revealing positions that only made them easier targets. Simoheha remained methodical. He did not increase his pace. He did not grow careless. Each engagement ended with relocation, each position carefully abandoned before the enemy could respond. He understood that survival depended not on aggression, but on restraint. The forest offered endless places to hide, but only if one respected its rhythms. On March 6, 1940, the 99th day of his campaign, the war finally reached him. Amid the confusion of an advancing Soviet unit, a soldier fired blindly in panic, using explosive ammunition. The bullet struck Simo in the face and detonated on impact. The force shattered his jaw and tore away flesh and bone. He collapsed instantly into the snow. When Finnish soldiers reached the area, they found devastation. Simo was barely recognizable. His injuries appeared fatal. In the chaos of battle and the bitter cold, his body was placed among the dead. Word spread quickly. The White Death was gone. Relief swept through Soviet ranks. The ghost had finally been killed. But the cold that had tormented so many men now worked in Simo's favor. His body temperature dropped rapidly, slowing his metabolism and preserving what little life remained. He did not bleed out. He did not die. He lay unconscious, frozen, indistinguishable from the fallen around him as the fighting continued and then gradually faded. Days passed. The forest grew quiet again, not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. On March 13th, 1940, the Winter War ended. A ceasefire was declared. Guns fell silent. On that same day, as the battlefield settled into uneasy calm, Simoheha opened his eyes. He had survived. The man the Red Army believed it had erased was still alive, pulled back from death by the very cold and silence he had mastered. The war that had turned him into a legend was over, but its lessons had already been written in blood across the snow. Simoheha did not return from the war as a hero in the way legends are usually told. He returned broken, scarred, and silent. Surgeons worked on his shattered face again and again, rebuilding bone where explosive metal had destroyed it. Each operation was slow and painful. Recovery took years. The war had ended, but its cost remained written permanently into his body. When he was finally strong enough, Simo went home. There were no victory parades waiting for him, no speeches, no desire on his part to relive what he had done. He returned to the same forests, the same fields, and the same routines he had known before the war. He hunted again, farmed again, and later bred dogs. To those around him, he was a quiet man who preferred animals to crowds and silence to stories. He did not seek recognition, and he did not glorify what had happened. Finland had survived. The Winter War ended with territorial losses, but independence intact. For the Soviet Union, the cost was catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of casualties revealed weaknesses that the world had not expected. Observers in Germany studied the conflict closely. Adolf Hitler concluded that the Red Army was fragile, a judgment that would later influence his decision to invade the Soviet Union. The lessons of Finland echoed far beyond its borders. Yet the most important lesson did not belong to generals or politicians. Simoheha had proven that modern war was not decided solely by machines, numbers, or technology. The Red Army had tanks, aircraft, artillery, and scopes. He had a simple rifle, iron sights, and patience. He did not win because he had better equipment. He won because he understood where he was fighting. He knew the snow, the trees, the cold, and the silence. He adapted while others relied on doctrine. When asked years later about his extraordinary record, Simo gave no dramatic explanation. He did not speak of hatred, ideology, or revenge. He said only that he practiced, that he did what he had always done, that he used what he knew. In his own writings, he referred to his kills not as victories, but as sins. It was not a statement of guilt or pride, but of realism. War, to him, was not glory. It was necessity, something imposed, endured, and survived. Simoheha lived for decades after the snow melted and the guns fell silent. He lived longer in peace than he ever did in combat. When he died in 2002 at the age of 96, the world remembered him as the deadliest sniper in history. But that title misses the point. He was not dangerous because he was deadly. He was deadly because he was patient, because he adapted, because he understood the ground beneath his feet. The Red Army dismissed his rifle as useless in modern war. History proved the opposite. In the end, it was not technology that controlled the battlefield. It was the man who understood the land and waited. War is often explained through numbers. Divisions deployed, tanks destroyed, kilometers gained or lost. But the story of Simoheha exposes how misleading those measurements can be. In the frozen forests of Finland, numbers meant nothing once men stepped off the roads and into the trees. There, the war was no longer an equation of strength versus strength. It became a contest between understanding and ignorance, between adaptation and assumption. The Red Army entered Finland believing that modern war had already been solved. Technology would decide everything. Firepower would overwhelm resistance. Scale would crush skill. This belief was not irrational. It was supported by doctrine, industrial capacity, and recent experience. But it rested on a dangerous assumption, that the battlefield would obey the theory. Finland proved that terrain does not care about theory. Snow does not respect doctrine. Coal does not negotiate with technology. And forests do not reward mass, they reward patience. Simoheha did not defeat the Red Army by outgunning it. He defeated it by refusing to play its game. Where Soviet soldiers depended on equipment, he depended on familiarity. Where they trusted optics, he trusted his senses. Where they moved quickly to impose control, he waited until control was already his. His success was not the result of secret weapons or superhuman ability, but of something far more uncomfortable to admit: deep preparation applied quietly over time. One of the clearest lessons from He's story is that expertise built slowly will always outperform shortcuts built quickly. His skill did not appear during the war. It was accumulated over decades of hunting, observing, failing, correcting, and learning. He did not practice to become a sniper. He practiced to survive in the forest. When war arrived, those skills transferred naturally. This is a lesson modern systems often forget. Training designed only for specific outcomes collapses when conditions change. Training built around fundamentals adapts. Technology, often presented as the ultimate advantage, reveals its limitations under extreme conditions. Scopes that worked perfectly in manuals failed in sub-zero temperatures. Weapons designed for open terrain lost relevance in dense forest. Communication systems broke down when visibility shrank to meters. He's rejection of a scope was not an act of stubbornness or nostalgia, it was a calculated understanding of environment. He did not reject modernity. He rejected incompatibility. This distinction matters. The lesson is not that old tools are better than new ones. It is that tools must serve context, not ideology. Militaries, organizations, and individuals repeatedly make the same mistake. They optimize for ideal conditions and ignore edge cases. But history is written in edge cases. Crises do not occur when systems are comfortable. They occur when systems are stressed beyond design assumptions. Another lesson lies in He's relationship with visibility. In modern thinking, success is often equated with presence, being seen, being loud, being recognized. He inverted this logic. His power came from being unseen. He did not assert dominance through visibility. He erased it. This created not just physical damage, but psychological collapse. Soldiers fear what they cannot identify more than what they can confront. The unseen enemy occupies the mind continuously. It never allows closure. This principle extends beyond warfare. In competitive environments, whether business, politics, or personal conflict, those who act quietly, prepare deeply, and move selectively often outperform those who rely on constant display. Visibility attracts attention. Attention attracts resistance. He avoided both. He allowed the enemy to reveal themselves through movement, noise, and impatience. He responded only when the cost-benefit ratio was absolute. Patience, in this context, is not passive waiting. It is active restraint. He waited not because he hesitated, but because he understood timing. Each shot was chosen, not reactive. This level of discipline is rare, especially under pressure. Most people act to relieve anxiety, not to achieve optimal outcomes. They move because stillness is uncomfortable. He embraced discomfort as a weapon. The psychological dimension of the Winter War reveals another crucial lesson. Morale is not sustained by orders alone. Soviet soldiers did not lose morale because they were weak or cowardly. They lost morale because the environment stripped them of agency. They could not see the enemy. They could not predict danger. They could not respond effectively. Fear became constant, unresolvable, and cumulative. No amount of propaganda can survive sustained helplessness. He's impact was disproportionate because he targeted not just bodies, but confidence. Removing officers, scouts, and machine gunners multiplied confusion. Every shot had secondary effects. This teaches a broader lesson about leverage. Maximum impact rarely comes from attacking the largest target. It comes from attacking the most consequential one. In any system, certain nodes carry more influence than others. Understanding that structure matters more than raw force. Another uncomfortable lesson lies in He's humility. Despite his record, he never framed himself as a hero. He did not romanticize his actions. He called his kills sins, not trophies. This perspective reveals a psychological resilience often missing in those who seek glory. Glory ties identity to violence. When violence ends, identity collapses. Heha avoided this trap. He returned to being a man, not a symbol. This separation between action and ego allowed him to survive the aftermath of war. Many soldiers struggle not because they fought, but because they cannot leave behind the identity forged in combat. Heha never fully entered that identity. He did what was necessary, then let it end. This is a powerful lesson about boundaries. Knowing when to act is important. Knowing when to stop is equally vital. The story also challenges the idea that innovation always comes from complexity. Hei's most effective techniques, packing snow, freezing, firing positions, holding snow in his mouth, were brutally simple. They emerged not from laboratories, but from observation. He noticed patterns and solved problems with available materials. Innovation, in this sense, is not invention, it is adaptation. Complex systems often fail because they require ideal conditions to function. Simple systems endure because they tolerate error. Hei's methods did not rely on precision manufacturing or fragile components. They relied on physics, biology, and environment, things that do not change under stress. This principle applies far beyond warfare. The most resilient solutions are often the least elegant on paper. Another lesson emerges from the Red Army's failure to adapt quickly. Despite mounting evidence, doctrine lagged behind reality. Leadership clung to established beliefs, even as losses mounted. This is not unique to the Soviet Union. Organizations rarely abandon doctrine willingly. They wait until failure forces change. By then, damage is already done. Hei succeeded not because the Red Army was incompetent, but because it was rigid. Rigidity is deadly in dynamic environments. Flexibility is not optional, it is survival. Those who adapt early suffer less than those who adapt late. This is true in war, markets, and personal life. The cost of adaptation increases over time. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from Hei's story is this: mastery of environment outweighs mastery of tools. He did not dominate because he was stronger or faster. He dominated because he belonged. The forest was not hostile to him. It was familiar. Belonging creates advantage. Outsiders must learn rules under pressure. Insiders act instinctively. This raises a deeper point about preparation. True preparation is not reactive. It is immersive. Hei did not study Finland during the war. He lived it long before. When crisis arrived, he did not scramble to learn. He executed what he already knew. This is why preparation must occur before it seems necessary. Skills built during calm moments determine outcomes during chaos. Finally, Hei's life after war reminds us that survival is not the same as victory. He lived, but he carried scars. He found peace not through recognition, but through withdrawal. He returned to animals, forests, and routines, things that asked nothing from him. In doing so, he demonstrated another form of strength, the ability to step away from violence without needing validation. The Red Army dismissed his rifle as useless because it did not fit their image of modern war. History proved that image incomplete. War, like life, does not reward assumptions. It rewards understanding. It rewards patience. And it rewards those who listen more than they speak. In the frozen forests of Finland, a quiet farmer proved that the most dangerous weapon is not firepower, but familiarity. Not aggression, but restraint. Not technology, but adaptation. And that lesson, unlike the war itself, has never gone out of date. War is usually explained with diagrams, arrows on maps, tables of production, ratios of men, tanks, aircraft, and artillery. These abstractions make conflict appear manageable, even logical. They create the comforting illusion that war is something that can be solved by scale and planning. But the story of Simo Häyhä dismantles that illusion completely. In the frozen forests of Finland, war stopped behaving like a system and became something older, more primitive, and far less forgiving. The Red Army entered Finland in 1939 with absolute confidence. It had numbers beyond comparison, machines built by an industrial state, and a doctrine designed for modern warfare. From Moscow, the invasion looked like a formality. Finland was smaller, poorer, and militarily inferior by every measurable standard. The outcome appeared predetermined. What Soviet planners failed to understand was that numbers only matter if they can be applied. In Finland, the environment refused to cooperate. Snow erased roads. Forests swallowed formations. Cold punished every mistake. Visibility collapsed. Communication broke down. In those conditions, doctrine became a liability rather than an advantage. The Red Army had trained for movement, momentum, and concentration of force. Finland offered stillness, isolation, and fragmentation. What looked like overwhelming power on paper dissolved into confusion on the ground. Simo Häyhä did not defeat the Red Army by challenging its strength. He defeated it by exposing its assumptions. He never tried to match firepower with firepower or speed with speed. He understood that doing so would guarantee his own destruction. Instead, he fought a different war, one shaped by patience, concealment, and familiarity with the land. He turned the battlefield into something the Red Army could not control or even fully perceive. One of the first lessons from Häyhä's story is that mastery is rarely sudden. His effectiveness did not emerge when the war began. It was the product of decades of quiet preparation. Hunting birds in Finnish forests taught him skills no military academy could replicate: distance estimation without instruments, breath control under pressure, absolute stillness for hours at a time, an intuitive understanding of how living beings move when they feel threatened. None of this was glamorous. None of it was designed for war. Yet when war arrived, these skills proved decisive. Modern systems often emphasize rapid training, specialization, and efficiency. Häyhä's life suggests a different truth. Deep, generalized mastery built over time adapts better than narrow expertise built quickly. His skills were transferable because they were fundamental. They were not tied to a specific weapon or tactic. They were tied to perception, discipline, and environment. When conditions changed, his competence remained. Another lesson lies in his rejection of technology that did not serve the context. Häyhä was not anti-modern. He simply understood that tools are only as useful as their compatibility with conditions. Scopes reflected light in snow. They fogged in extreme cold. They required a higher shooting profile. In theory, they offered precision. In practice, they increased risk. Iron sights, though primitive by contemporary standards, worked reliably in the cold and allowed him to remain invisible. This challenges a common belief that newer technology always equals progress. History repeatedly shows that technological advantage is conditional. It depends on environment, logistics, maintenance, and user behavior. When any of these factors break down, sophistication becomes fragility. Häyhä's success was not about rejecting progress. It was about selecting reliability over novelty. Reliability, in extreme conditions, is more valuable than capability. A weapon that works every time is deadlier than one that works perfectly only under ideal circumstances. This principle extends far beyond warfare. In business, engineering, medicine, and personal life, systems that tolerate error survive longer than systems optimized for perfection. Häyhä's methods were crude but robust. They functioned in cold, silence, and isolation. They did not require resupply, calibration, or coordination. Visibility plays another critical role in this story. Modern conflict often emphasizes dominance through presence, control of territory, visible force, constant activity. Häyhä inverted this logic. His power came from absence. He was effective precisely because he could not be seen, tracked, or predicted. This created a psychological effect far greater than his physical impact. Fear does not require large numbers to spread. It requires uncertainty. Soviet soldiers were not terrified because they were losing battles. They were terrified because they could not locate the threat. They could not retaliate. They could not restore control. The forest became a place of constant anticipation, where every pause felt dangerous. This kind of fear erodes morale, silently and irreversibly. The lesson here is that influence often operates invisibly. The most disruptive forces are not always the loudest or most obvious. They are the ones that destabilize expectations. He did not overwhelm the Red Army. He confused it. He forced it to react rather than act. Once reaction replaces intention, control is lost. Patience is often misunderstood as passivity. He's patience was active. It was disciplined restraint. He did not fire when targets appeared. He fired when targets mattered. He waited not because he hesitated, but because he understood timing. This level of self-control is rare, especially under stress. Most people act to relieve discomfort, not to maximize outcome. He had tolerated discomfort as part of the process. Stillness, in his case, was a weapon. Remaining motionless for hours in sub-zero temperatures required not just physical endurance, but mental dominance over impulse. Every instinct tells a human being to move, to adjust, to seek relief. He overrode those instincts. This ability to resist immediate urges in favor of long-term advantage is a defining trait of exceptional performers in any field. The psychological collapse of Soviet units reveals another lesson. Morale is fragile when agency is removed. Soviet soldiers were not lacking courage. They were deprived of meaningful action. They could not fight back effectively. They could not understand the threat. They could not adapt fast enough. Over time, fear replaced initiative. Orders became threats rather than guidance. Discipline turned coercive. Leadership cannot function when followers feel powerless. No ideology, no rhetoric, no punishment can compensate for sustained helplessness. He's impact extended far beyond his kill count. He undermined the Red Army's belief that it controlled the battlefield. Once that belief collapsed, numbers no longer mattered. Target selection also played a critical role in his effectiveness. He did not fire indiscriminately. He removed officers, machine gunners, scouts, individuals whose absence multiplied confusion. This demonstrates the principle of leverage. Maximum impact comes from understanding systems, not from brute force. Every organization has nodes that carry disproportionate influence. Identifying and neutralizing those nodes produces cascading effects. In broader terms, this is a lesson about efficiency. Effort applied without understanding wastes resources. Effort applied with precision changes outcomes. He did not need to kill everyone. He needed to kill the right people at the right time. This approach is applicable far beyond war. In any complex system, strategic focus outperforms sheer effort. Another striking aspect of He's story is his relationship with identity. Despite his achievements, he never embraced the role of hero. He did not cultivate a legend or seek recognition. He referred to his kills as sins, not victories. This language reveals a profound psychological separation between action and ego. Many individuals are destroyed not by what they do, but by how tightly they bind their identity to their actions. He avoided this trap. He did not define himself by violence. When the war ended, he returned to being a farmer and hunter. This allowed him to reintegrate into civilian life in a way many veterans cannot. Glorification of violence often leaves individuals trapped in the past. He's refusal to glorify his actions preserved his future. He accepted responsibility without celebration. This balanced acknowledgement without pride suggests emotional maturity that modern narratives often ignore. The simplicity of his techniques offers another important lesson. Packing snow to prevent muzzle flash, freezing firing positions, holding snow in his mouth to conceal breath. These were not complex innovations. They were observations translated into solutions. He did not invent new tools. He adapted existing conditions. Innovation is often framed as invention. In reality, adaptation is more common and more effective. Most breakthroughs come not from creating something entirely new, but from using what already exists differently. He's environment provided everything he needed. He simply paid attention. Complex systems often fail under stress because they require too many conditions to remain true. Simple systems endure because they accept imperfection. He's methods were forgiving. They allowed error. They functioned despite cold, fatigue, and isolation. This is why they survived. The Red Army's failure to adapt quickly highlights the danger of rigidity. Doctrine persisted despite mounting evidence that conditions demanded change. Leadership hesitated. Assumptions remained intact until failure became undeniable. By then, damage was irreversible. Adaptation is uncomfortable because it requires admitting error. Institutions resist this instinctively. He exploited that resistance. He forced the Red Army into a reality it was slow to accept. Those who adapt first suffer less than those who adapt late. This is a timeless principle. Perhaps the most fundamental lesson of all is that environment matters more than equipment. He belonged to the forest. He did not need to learn it under pressure. It was already part of him. Outsiders must think consciously. Insiders act instinctively. That difference is decisive. Preparation, in this sense, is not rehearsal. It is immersion. He did not prepare for war. He prepared for life in the forest. When war arrived, he did not need to change. This suggests that the most valuable preparation often appears irrelevant until crisis reveals its worth. Finally, He's long life after the war reminds us that survival is not synonymous with victory. He lived, but he carried scars. He found peace, not through recognition, but through withdrawal. He chose silence over story, animals over crowds, routine over remembrance. The Red Army dismissed his rifle as useless because it did not fit their vision of modern war. History proved that vision incomplete. War, like life, does not reward assumptions. It rewards understanding. It rewards patience. It rewards those who listen to their environment rather than impose ideology upon it. In the frozen forests of Finland, a quiet man with an old rifle demonstrated a truth that remains uncomfortable and enduring. Power belongs not to those who possess the most, but to those who understand the most. And understanding, once earned, does not disappear when the snow melts. War is often explained through scale. Bigger armies, better weapons, more machines. On paper, these factors appear decisive, and for much of modern history, they have been treated as the ultimate measures of power. Yet the story of Simo Heihe exposes how fragile those assumptions become when war leaves the abstract world of planning and enters the physical reality of terrain, climate, and human psychology. In the frozen forests of Finland, the logic of numbers collapsed, replaced by something far older and more unforgiving. The Red Army invaded Finland believing modern warfare had already been solved. Doctrine emphasized momentum, mass, and overwhelming force. Tanks would advance, infantry would follow, and resistance would be crushed through sheer scale. But Finland was not a place that rewarded movement or visibility. Snow erased roads, forests, fractured formations, and cold punished even minor mistakes. In that environment, the Red Army's advantages could not be fully applied. Power that cannot be used is not power at all. Simo Heihe did not defeat the Red Army by matching its strength. He defeated it by refusing to engage on its terms. He understood that survival depended on rejecting the enemy's expectations. While Soviet soldiers relied on technology and coordination, Heihe relied on patience and familiarity. He did not attempt to dominate the battlefield. He disappeared into it. This reveals a fundamental lesson. Control does not always come from presence. Sometimes it comes from absence. One of the most important lessons from Hayes' story is that mastery is built long before it is needed. His skills were not created by the war. They were accumulated over decades of hunting in the same forests where he later fought. Distance estimation, breath control, absolute stillness, and terrain reading were not military techniques to him. They were habits of life.